Chapter 1. Sunset over Athens. "We held them off for a week up there back in 1944, said the press attaché, pointing up to the Acropolis. "The Germans," said Sophie. "No, dear lady," said the attaché, a pop-eyed man with a military moustache. "The Greeks." Sophie glanced at Forrester, puzzled. "I thought the British were on the same side as the Greeks," she said. "We were on the same side as the Greeks, yes," said the attaché, "but not the communists." They were inching their way along Aeolus Street, which runs west from Stadium Street to the foot of the Acropolis, and every few yards the car had to slow down to avoid old ladies spilling onto the roadway, offering hot chestnuts, green-dyed cakes, black market cigarettes, candles decorated with pictures of the Virgin Mary, transfers of the crucified Christ to stick on your arm, and fireworks with which to celebrate Holy Week 1946. Forrester had flown to Athens because, to his amazement, the Empire Council for Archaeology had finally given him the funds for his expedition to Crete. But it turned out there were people in the Greek capital who wanted to see him before he set off for the island, and the press attaché from the British Embassy had been waiting for them at the airport in a Lagonda, which must have been in use before the Archduke Ferdinand went to Sarajevo, possibly when the Archduke went to Sarajevo. "During the war, of course," said Forrester, "the communists were some of the best fighters, and we were all on the same side." Every other house, Forrester noted, now seemed to be daubed with red communist slogans. "That was then," said the attaché, whose name was Lancaster. "But ever since the Germans left, the Reds have been trying to take over. Came as close as damn it just after I arrived, too, in 44, hence the fight outside the Parthenon." "Which I imagine would have been a very good defensive position," said Forrester. "That's my point, old chap," said Lancaster. "Made you realise why the Greeks put the Acropolis there in the first place. It looks magnificent, but it's all about power." Countess Sophie Arnfeldt-Larig's eyes met Forrester's in a secret smile. They were both savouring the delight of being together again after their brief, dangerous encounter in Norway. When Forrester had asked her if she wanted to come with him on the Cretan expedition, he had held his breath, wondering whether he had misread what had passed between them during those tense, tender, and almost fatal hours at Bjornsfjord. But to his profound relief, she had responded to his invitation immediately. After 4 years of balancing the demands of supporting the Norwegian resistance and protecting the tenants on her estates from the German occupiers, she was eager to escape, and when they had met at London Airport, it was as if they had never parted. During the flight to Athens, she had clasped his hand tightly in hers, and though they had said little, it seemed that little needed saying. The war was over, and they were back together again. It was enough. Now they were being driven through what was left of the old Turkish bazaar, past alleys full of toy-makers, shoemakers, and coppersmiths, like something out of the Middle Ages. There was even a row of shops whose windows were entirely filled with buttons. Sophie smiled. "I must go to those shops," she said. "In Norway, for some reason, it was impossible during the occupation to readily obtain any buttons." Her English, lightly accented and perfectly pronounced, was composed of a slightly old-fashioned vocabulary once provided to the nobility of Europe through well-qualified governesses. "Say again?" asked Lancaster. "Hard to hear through this din," which was an understatement. The Greeks, Forrester had always felt, had a unique passion for noise. Radios blared from every open window, and the street was loud with conversations being carried on at the top of voices, seconded by church bells, crowing cockerels, the clanging of trams, and the roar of internal combustion engines. A motorcycle passed them with a deafening boom. "Look at his exhaust," said Lancaster, his fingers drumming the steering wheel. "I'm pretty certain not only are those not silencers, they're actually amplifiers." The attaché's Christian name was Osbert, which Forrester remembered reading somewhere during the war. Lancaster turned to Sophie. "So what was it you wanted to shop for, Countess?" "Buttons," said Sophie. "Buttons tomorrow," said Lancaster decisively. "Sunset tonight," and swerved the car violently into the curb beside a ramshackle taverna whose sign was almost hidden under a canopy of vines. "Hop out and grab a table." Moments later, they were looking over the shoulder of the proprietor, an unshaven man in a shirt that looked as if it had not been washed since the German invasion.